Rocky Howard. Thank you for joining me, Chief People and Equity Officer at the Mom
Oh,
Project. How's it going?
I should ask you how it's going. I so appreciate you getting up so early, and I'm really excited to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me for this conversation.
I'm excited. I mean, this is a great moment to talk about HR, and I'm here with an expert, so I'm happy to dig in. I'm just sort of curious to kick things off if you can talk a little bit about your work with the Mom Project. How does the group advocate?
Yeah, so it's a powerful combination that we do at the Mom Project. And so what we do is we connect world-class companies who are really very committed to the journey that mom takes and the journey that mom takes along the multiple intersections of her career. And so we connect those companies with moms, again, at different points in their career. So we help moms through multiple ways. We build communities for moms where they really can get supported along this journey through job search tools, through upskilling, through just camaraderie and understanding. And we cultivate that community. We use technology to do matching with that community to the jobs. We have a marketplace that our employers can join and post their jobs. Really, one of those competitive advantages for us is our Work Labs division that really helps us to be able to understand what does mom need on that journey and really help us educate our employers to this is how you can do this a little bit better. In essence, we spend our days in service to mom.
Oh, nice. And I know that you mentioned the Work Labs. I know part of your work is a qualitative workforce analytics tool that helps employees discover the difference between what employees want and what they actually need. Given the level of insight that you have into the market, what's new in terms of employee needs?
You know what? It's so interesting because I think you've heard us in HR, you've heard us in recruiting over the last couple of years. There's been a lot of emphasis on candidate experience. And we think about what it's like to bring people to engage with our brands and our organizations. We don't always think about what that journey is like for the non-majority person that sits in our organization. And so I think the biggest thing that's happened, and I'm going to share a few insights with you, but I think the biggest thing that's happened is this shift towards recognizing that these things that we thought of before as, best practices or, cutting edge or almost nice to haves are no longer nice to haves. Mm-hmm. People spent the pandemic, no matter whether you're a mom or a person, really kind of stepping back and reevaluating what's important to them. And I think the work that we do at the Mom Project, I'm also really honored to be an advisor for an organization called Just Capital. And I think what we find at Just Capital and what we find at the Mom Project is that people expect their employers to really create diverse, inclusive cultures where people can just be themselves. They're looking for organizations to be more just. And so what's really interesting about that, I wore a shirt for you all today because I think this is what it comes down to. It comes down to being human and kind. And we have a problem trying to be human and kind at scale. That doesn't feel like, it feels like we should be doing a lot more. But I think it comes down to being human and kind. And why I say this is in one of our reports, and I will drop a link. I don't want to do it now. Brandon knows I've had tech problems, so I don't want to try to do it until we're done talking. I'll drop a link to Work Labs. You can go to worklabs.com and go to our resources page. And you'll see one of our reports that talks about building a better workplace. And there's 10 drivers for women's success at work. And I'm going to share those drivers with you. But what's so interesting to me is they almost feel like common sense. And every employer, including me as a head of Chief and People, often find struggles with making sure everyone in our organization has the experience for these things, right? And so one is flexibility. Does it really matter if someone does the work from 9 to 5 or from 5 to 9? I think you really need to think about that as an organization. Moms especially are looking for flexibility. And if you get the work delivered, recognize that there are some positions. If I'm a customer service person, I've got to be on the phone between this time and this time. But could you maybe marry 2 customer service people who are looking to have those complementary hours? But if I'm an accountant, if I'm a head of people, if I have some core availability to make sure that people can interact with me, then as long as I'm delivering my work by when you need it, do you really care about what hours I work? We've got to let go of this notion of you've got to be at your desk from 9 to 5. Well, you know what? I've got a kid that has to be at work. I have a doctor's appointment. I have all kinds of things that intersect with that. It makes me no less committed to getting the work done, right? I think you have to, what's really interesting is the second one. It's respect. Respect. People want respect. And they're not talking about the old school, I went to the sexual harassment class and I know I can't walk up to you and pinch you anymore. And I can't have these kind of things on my desk that are offensive. People want to be treated human and kindly. Even if you think about how the world works, we've moved from the golden rule to the platinum rule. So instead of treating people the way you want to be treated, let's talk about treating people the way they want to be treated. And so I think one of the mistakes we make when we think about respect is we fail to ask someone, what do you need and how can I support you? And be willing to listen to that and integrate it into your organizational policies and practices, right? Benefits is a big, important part of this equation. One of the things that I'll be honest, I had never seen until I came from the to the Mom Project, and I think it's an incredible, incredible offering, is we have support for miscarriage leave. Right? If you've had a miscarriage, we give you time off, we give you support, etc. And as a woman who's had a miscarriage far long ago, it was devastating to even have to try to learn how to explain what I needed and ask for time off and navigate the waters. Now understand a company who's saying, you know what? We honor that that may be part of your journey. And so we've already put a contention plan in for it. Even with COVID right now, our organization is giving people COVID days that don't touch their standard PTO because people are concerned if I get COVID or, oh my gosh, I have to save my PTO days until the end of the year because in case I get COVID. No, if you have COVID, if someone in your home is impacted by COVID, we want you to be able to take care of your family. And we still want you to be able to take time away from the business to be able to take a breath. It's important. Recognition and development is a key part of this equation. How is it that your employees, your team members want to be recognized, and where are you investing in their personal and professional development? And this doesn't have to be huge. It does have to be consistent, right? You need to be able to show people that they have a path within your organization, that you appreciate the work that they do, that you're interested in their personal development as well. I think we often think about development in terms of here's what you're going to do professionally that ties, and we have all of these kind of conditions. We'll give you tuition reimbursement, but you have to get an A or a B to get the full reimbursement. And it has to be a course that is tied to what you do as a job and all of this kind of thing. Can we rethink that? So, a good example is we give a L&D stipend to all of our employees. And as long as it's personal and professional development, they don't have to have a certain kind of grade. It doesn't have to tie to their job. It just has to be about development. So how do we look at that through a different lens? I love that. You know what? I don't know if it runs in every market, but in our market, there's an Amazon commercial that runs, and it talks about this person that worked for Amazon, and he went through this personal problem. His mom died, his brother died. He decided he wanted to be a nurse. And it's a commercial for Amazon because Amazon paid for part of his education, and now he's gone off to be a nurse. It doesn't have a direct benefit. Amazon isn't going to hire him as a nurse. But what does that say? Do you know that person probably stayed much longer at Amazon? They're dedicated, and now they're coming on national TV to talk about what a wonderful organization it is because they invested in that person's learning and personal development, right? How can we rethink that? The other thing that people are asking for is leadership. And I think we often miss the trick here. Do we hold our leaders accountable for a functional performance metric? And do we hold them accountable with the same type of rigor for leading their teams and meeting people where they are? Do we give our leaders the right kind of skills to be able to do that? It's tough leading in this virtual world. Have we thought about how we help and support our leaders do that better? I think all of us as companies are struggling with that. And no matter your size, it's really key and critical. We often ask people to travel at off-hour work events and to travel, right? And here's what we know for sure. The previous politics about how people get promoted, how they get to network, often have to do with who they spend time with. And so if I want to get to know the boss, then I have to go to happy hour, right? Whether it's virtual happy hour or when we're all together, I have to go to a happy hour. Well, people are saying, I don't want to feel like I have to go to off-hour events or I have to travel, especially in this kind of world. And let's not only think about mom, but there are, we ask people in the LGBTQ community all the time to potentially travel to areas that are not safe to them or not aligned to who they are. And this is what they have to do to get promoted or to be able to network with the right people or to be seen, to be connected. There are enough people in our organization who are really willing to do that and joyfully do it. Let's not penalize the people who are not. So moms are saying, like, I don't want to have to do that, right? Not all the time. Moms want to come work for companies that have great culture that are led by collaboration, right? I don't need all of this bells and whistles. I need to know that there's a seat at the table for me. I belong at the seat and I feel comfortable in the seat and that my voice is heard and appreciated. And if I'm not saying anything, someone's looking around saying, I haven't heard that voice. Let's collaborate. Let's get that perspective. It goes back to respect. And the 10th thing that we have found that people want are resources and having the right resources that they actually need to do their job in the right environment. And so, Brandon, when you think about these things that our research shows, over 1,000 moms were interviewed to get to this data. None of it sounds new or sexy. Like everybody wants us to give kind of, oh, here's the one thing you can do to be a great employer for mom. These are things that, should be part of being human and kind. It should be part of what we're doing for all of our employees. We should be shifting the narrative around each one of these things to evolve as the way the world is evolving. And so it's interesting. It's not things that we don't know. My theory is it's sometimes things that we don't know how to scale, or we're not putting the effort in to go, well, this is what this meant 10 years ago. What does it mean today?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And as you mentioned, a lot of those programs sound like things that would be universally appreciated. I do wonder, you talked to, and thank you very much for the sort of the 10 points. I'm sort of curious, can you position how diversity, equity, and inclusion kind of fits into your work at the Mom Project? There's obviously a lot of all of those measures would have been inclusive ones for moms coming into work. But can you talk specifically about the
Yeah,
DEI piece,
sure.
please?
It was really important to me to be Chief People and Equity Officer because I think you can't actually build a high performing culture that is not inclusive, right? And that we're not looking for how everyone can work together. And I also think when you think about our broader initiatives, not just my work as Chief People and Equity Officer, but when you think about our broader talent initiatives, when I show up in the world and when I introduce myself, I always say I identify as she, her, Black, Christian, Gen X, wife, mom. Those are multiple dimensions of my diversity. So I'm still mom, but there are other pieces and other dimensions to who I am as mom that will impact my needs. And so we need to be able to think about this. And a perfect example of what the Mom Project is doing with this is we have to recognize and we have to stop being uncomfortable with saying this. Women of color have been disadvantaged in a way that majority people haven't. It's a fact, right? We may not like it. It's an ugly fact of the world. We can look at the stats around compensation. We can look at the stats around placement. Even if you look, I think right now, only 7.5% of the CEOs on the Fortune 500 are women and 1% are Black. You can't argue the statistics, right? And so when we think of mom, we have to think of the multiple dimensions of mom and what can we do to shift and change that narrative. And part of the challenge sometimes is not only do you have women of color who are working moms and trying to figure out that piece. Let's not forget that 2.3 million moms left the workplace in 2020 trying to navigate a pandemic with being caretakers, whether that caretaker is of my children, that caretaker may be I've taken on the role of other children, nieces, nephews, grandchildren. I may be a caretaker to my parents. I may be caretaking multiple generations. God forbid we talk about the fact that I'm a wife. I have a partner that needs caretaking, and we're trying to navigate all of that. And at this point in the world, 2.3 million moms went, yeah, I just can't do that, right? I just can't do that. You put that on top of the fact, and here's another reason why I think moms aren't doing that, and why this disproportionately impacts women of color and moms of color. Maybe we didn't have the same resources you did. Maybe we started at a different place in our journey, which closes some of those doors. Maybe we weren't educated in the same way, etc. So now, not only do I have to fight everything else that every other mom has fought, I'm also fighting how do I catch up. So one of the things that we started during the pandemic, and we're so proud of at momproject.org, is our RISE program. And RISE actually has partnered with some phenomenal organizations to create certification classes that allows moms to upskill. So there's things like Salesforce administration, Google project management. And so moms join the program and they're able to take that program for free because we have wonderful people who are dedicating money to this nonprofit. And we were able to upskill over 1,000 women last year. It's an incredible piece. And when you think about what Mom Project is trying to do is we're trying to create over $1 billion of economic opportunity for mom. That's a big place to do it. So when you think about DEI, it's not only what we think about and how we look at DEI in our own organization, but it's also the steps that we're taking to help other organizations and help moms of color as a whole.
Yeah, it's great. That's a perfect pivot, actually, to think about, advocating for industry-wide change. One of the industry verticals that we focus on a lot in mergers and acquisition is private equity. And I'm just curious, you're talking a lot about equitable practices in the workforce. Right now, a lot of organizations that maybe haven't had that much experience with those practices are attempting to implement them. Obviously, as you mentioned, progress towards achieving realistic gains has been slow in coming. What tips can you offer, I guess, to other corporate or private equity HR professionals who are attempting to sort of bring their organizations into the future?
Yeah, so I think one thing I'd like to say about private equity goes across sizes, but especially for our smaller companies, a lot of times they go, we're too small to do this. We don't need to worry about this at this point in time in the journey. That is the equivalent of saying, I don't need to teach my kids values and morals and principles. They're too young. I'll figure it out when they're 16 or they're an adult. If you haven't stopped to embed values or principles in your child until they're 16, 17, and they're further down on that journey, guess what? You're SOL, right? So why can't we think about it in that same way? Let's start at the beginning. Let's set a stage for what we want to be. And let's make sure at every stage of our journey, we're working through that. And so the first thing I would say is determine what diversity means within your organization. There are multiple dimensions of diversity. You're never going to get it all right, but be very clear about what diversity means in your organization and what success looks like. Be clear about communicating what that is, right? Make diversity both human and kind and part of your culture, but make it embedded as a business practice. Here's the truth of the matter. Any imperative business initiative that's been important has had goals, established metrics, it's measured. We hold people accountable through the whole organization. But we don't do that with our DEI initiatives. And we need to treat DEI as any other business imperative would. Train the whole organization in terms of what's their role in supporting this diversity and inclusive culture. I find that a lot of times in the C-suite, at the top, founders, we're all really excited. It's important to us. We're clear. We want it to happen. But we don't tell the receptionist. We don't tell the customer service people. This is important. We really don't tell middle managers, and we don't hold them accountable. And so then what we dream up of here doesn't get executed through the organization because we haven't taught everybody that everyone has a role in DEI. It is not your CEO's responsibility. It's not your diversity person's responsibility. It's everyone's responsibility. So teach them how. Hold them accountable. Please move it from being performative and checkbox. Like if you're trying to, have good marketing, you're trying to, please your board because you've got X percentage and it really isn't genuine and authentic, just forget about it. I'd rather you just be yourself. But if it's really genuine and authentic, then communicate it. Make sure that your brand is aligned to it. Think about diversity in every piece of your business. And at the end of the day, be human and kind.
That's a great point. Talking to other DEI professionals, one point that does come up a lot is that you can tell how serious an organization is about their policies by who's heading it. If it's an investor relations person, if the role sits in a marketing department, then that sort of sends a strong message that it's all about communications and not about
and how willing are you to communicate? How willing are you to say, this is where I am? And I think here's the one thing I want people to know. We're often embarrassed to communicate where we are because we're at the beginning of the journey. In my previous role as Chief Diversity Officer at Smart Recruiters, we surveyed over 400 companies, and we had created a toolkit that allowed any company to be able to assess their ability to hire diverse talent. And I'm talking global companies that you all would certainly recognize. What was interesting is more than 70% of those companies, and this was on a kind of a 4-tiered scale, right? You start the journey here, here's your maturity model, 1, 2, 3, 4. Over 70% of those companies are at a 1 or 2. We're all in it together. So be bold about saying, look, I'm not where we are. I'm at a number 1, but I am committed to doing this. And this is how we're going to move forward, and continue to communicate to people what you're doing. But to your point, it can't be, I only want to communicate when it's good news. Like what people really respect is transparency.
That makes sense. Transparency, commitment. And as you mentioned, you've given, I think, a lot of organizations some
Yeah.
really good starting points, flexibility, and work hours when to come to a seminar, for instance. Great, great tips. Thank you so much for your time, Rocky. I do want to, we have a little bit of time left, so I wanted to pull something that I was hiding under my sleeve. Obviously, this has been a big year for a lot of changes in HR. Just sitting from your vantage point, you've obviously done a lot of survey work, you've done a lot of qualitative analysis with the workforce. What are we going to still be having the same conversations this time in 2023? What will change, do you think, the most in your role in
It's a
HR?
really great question. I think we will be having some of the same conversations because I think we're trying to figure out how to deal with the permanency of what's happened and how the world changed. I think when we came into the pandemic, when things like, I'll be really honest, when the world rallied around diversity with George Floyd's murder as a catalyst, I, as a Black woman, was really angry because it felt like people were jumping on this bandwagon because it was social. Right. And being part of the Black community, I realized that this George Floyd's murder was not the first. It wouldn't be the last. And this had been going on for hundreds of years. But what I'm really glad to see is it doesn't feel like it's a movement or it was just a moment. There's continued conversations and depth around diversity. And I think that's what we're going to find with the pandemic. Remote working, employee engagement, et cetera. It's not a movement. It's not a moment. It's our new way of work. And HR professionals are going to have to adjust to that.